This should be a fun conversation.
Yeah, I think so. All right, the stream has started. And it will be posted to cool. So it's
We're up.
yeah, it's posted to the chat. So we'll start to see a trickle of dudes coming in. I'm just going to pee real fast, Jimmy.
Yeah, man.
Give people a chance to kind of come in. All right, I see one popped in, so I know we're good.
Oh, here comes another one. welcome to the first two King Kayfabers. We are just gearing up to record this next conversation, talking about Mobius and specifically the documentary In Search of Mobius. Pretty fun documentary if you guys haven't watched it yet. And I don't think we're going to be spoiling anything. You know, it's an overview of his career, so that's what we'll be focusing on and talking about some of the points that he brings out. So if you haven't seen it yet, no worries. Listen to us talk about it, and then whenever you watch it, it'll give you probably a few things to look for and come to your own conclusions about. But it should be good. Hopefully you guys out there are staying warm wherever you're at. We've gotten our Arctic blast this week. I was telling, Ed mentioned his fingertips. It was 7 degrees yesterday morning whenever I left the house, and man, it made me think about like that Kansas City playoff game last week. I think it was -5 without wind chill factor, and I don't know how you can be outside in -5 for 4 hours or whatever a football game is. That just seems way too cold. It's actually warmed up. Whenever I parked the car out here, it said it was 22. So, I don't know. I think we have a lot more winter on the way, but hopefully it's not 7 degrees too much longer. We have some fun episodes this week, too. So, looking forward to the King Kayfaber recording session after this as well. And make sure you remember that we are doing that, too. So, 2 sessions this week. We've been kicking around different ideas for different shows. And, well, maybe I'll save this for the future. But yeah, we're going to be doing a Wizard episode this week. So maybe back on some of the Wizard stuff. I've been talking about blasting through maybe a few of those to run through some of the stuff in 96, 97. The content, there's not a lot of exciting content, but the stuff that is exciting is very exciting. And I have a feeling that might be like the next couple of months of Wizard coverage may be built around that, because we are getting into late 96. And I think Marvel's bankruptcy is the end of 96. So we are getting close to that. And the fun thing of going through these Wizards is we know how most of this stuff shakes out, but they're covering it in real time. And that is, whenever you're faced with unknown outcomes, it's very interesting to read these news items as the news is breaking. And we have an example of that coming up in the Wizard that we're going to do today, where it feels like we're right in the middle of a big moment, as opposed to reflecting on that moment. Historically, it is more like, what the hell is happening? And that makes for an exciting way to see some of these events.
I don't know if West Coast Dave popped in yet, man, but he sent us this issue of Comics Journal where Hart D. Fisher interviews Rob Liefeld upon quitting. And I can't, like, we have digital versions of that, so it's in that mix. Tom Toll's cover.
I'm looking forward to I must have looked at that at some point.
There's a Frank Miller, a Todd McFarlane response that he mentions as being pretty catty. Like, I was like looking through the digital a little bit, but I didn't get to that
Dude,
part.
It's salty. The Wizard coverage, everybody's comments in there, very salty.
Yeah.
How does Hart D. Fisher get a Comics Journal assignment to interview Rob Liefeld. None of that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's amazing. I feel like Hart D. Fisher must have been posing undercover as like someone else to get that assignment. That's a lot of that's a lot of personalities.
So did you tell the people we're going to be recording right here?
I did, but I figured we'll probably do that as like a little intro beginning of the video.
Of course,
too.
that. Yeah, totally, man. We watched that Mobius documentary. It's not really called In Search of Mobius. Let me see what it's called.
Oh, then I may have told them the wrong thing.
No, it's weird because like on YouTube you find it by In Search of Mobius, but it's at the front couple of minutes where it has its real title.
I was telling people too, if they haven't watched this documentary yet, to go ahead and listen to us. Like it's not really spoilers or anything that we're covering. But it'll be something for them to
Mobius
do.
Redux: A Life in Pictures is what it's
Yep.
called. But you find it if you type in Search of Mobius. Let me just make sure. 1 second, guys. And I think that the title of the video, In Search of Mobius, is a provocative title. Is that how you say that? How do you say that word?
Redux?
Is it Redux?
That's what I say.
A Life in Pictures.
You think it's maybe the French
Some
word?
French bullshit.
Redo.
Yeah.
I took a French class before I went to Angoulême, and let me tell you, nobody wants me to try to speak French.
I don't speak French. When I say we, I mean us too, not yes or we. Roxanne Shante. Try to be reasonably brief with it, but get it all in. And then I guess you guys could be privy to, we'll record our intros for our other videos here too. And then there'll be probably a 15-minute pause. We'll move the internet, we'll move all our stuff into the other room, and then do the last round of videos. Good if you are, Jimmy.
I am.
So, with this, I imagine that we just have our proper kayfabe intro and we just get into things. Because it's all about just, like, putting FaceTime to the people, so clearly our faces are on it. So we could just jump right into stuff. We don't got to do an intro for this one, is what I'm saying. Do our typical intro. Alright, so I'm recording. I see the bars moving. Good to go.
I am.
Welcome to your favorite YouTube channel, Cartoonist Kayfabe. My name is Ed Piscor.
I'm Jim Rugg.
Today we're going to be taking a look at Mobius Redux: A Life in Pictures. This is a BBC4 documentary. You can find it floating around online on YouTube if you type in Search of Mobius. But first, you guys must know that we are a daily YouTube channel with more than 1,600 videos at your disposal. Good chance we might have talked about your favorite comics. Certainly probably talked about some of your favorite Mobius comics. So hit the magnifying glass on the front page of the Cartoonist Kayfabe YouTube channel. Search for your favorite titles. Check out those episodes. We are also sponsored in part by our Patreon. And the King Kayfabers on our Patreon get access to all of our videos before anybody else. Mitigates the kayfabe effect because they get first dibs on the stuff that we talk about. And they're hanging out with us in a live stream recording session, chat room. They're watching us record this thing unedited, which may be a treat, may not be a treat. We'll leave it to them to decide. But there is a lot of perks to being a King Kayfaber, and please consider supporting the channel that way. Without further ado, Jimmy, let's talk about Mobius Redux: A Life in Pictures. BBS documentary, 2006, I believe, is the time period that this thing was created, and it's a beautiful time for it to be created because Mobius is still with us. During the making of this documentary, I'm assuming that he was the president of Angoulême.
That was my impression too, because we get some footage from Angoulême and him being celebrated there. Although I imagine he was celebrated anytime he showed up at Angoulême.
Totally.
But yeah, I have a feeling that that's the case. The president. We
got a very vital and functioning Jodorowsky in that flick. We have vital and functioning Stan Lee in that documentary. We have a vital and functioning. Well, we have a functioning H.R. Giger. in that piece, and also Dan O'Bannon, who is very very sort of worse for the wear. He looks very sickly when they're talking to him, but he's still very cogent and stuff. You could just tell that like he's just not healthy. Do give him props though. Cigarette in hand. It's like fuck it. You know what I'm saying, man?
Droulet also features quite a bit.
Oh, if we're talking about just who's featuring, tons of people. We got Droulet, Enki Bilal makes a little cameo appearance. Jim Lee, Mike Mignola. Who else? Is that about it?
It is. I was trying to think if there were any Hollywood directors or somebody of that nature, and Dan O'Bannon is probably the main guy from Hollywood with Hollywood connections, and I guess Jodorowsky to some extent as a filmmaker.
Yeah. So let's jump right into things, man. It starts off with like a computer, Arzak, Intel kind of introduction, and it makes me appreciate Mobius even more because with all of the technology at the disposal of whoever put that together, you really see the beauty of, like, there's very little depth, even though you see like far cityscapes and stuff like that. Of course, it's very cheaply presented. It looks more like 1980s computer animation. Think the Crash Dummies cartoon or like Tron or something like that.
Yeah, and for the most part, this is a straightforward documentary. It goes in chronological order, which I think is a good way to present an artist who has all kinds of different stuff. But it's got to be the biggest misstep on the part of the filmmakers is that opening animation.
Right.
It's such a disservice to Mobius. It's literally burying the lead.
Totally.
You've got one of the greatest visual artists, period, and we're going to start with some kind of pretty hack CGI kind of animation. But don't let that stop you from checking out this documentary because that goes by quickly, and then we get into the great stuff.
Totally. Like you said, it's pretty linear. So you get his sort of early years, art school years. We get to see a lot of footage of him drawing, and like one of the things that I like a lot is they definitely have like the little record button on the Cintiq while he's drawing things, but also Mignola and Jim Lee.
Yes. Where
you see them at the board drawing some things, man, and then you get to see it kind of animated, which is pretty freaking fun.
Yeah, it made me wonder, like with the Cintiqs, like when does that become? Some of those guys might have been drawing on that Cintiq for the first time. Because that's pretty early, 2006, 2000. It's probably, I don't know exactly when this is recorded, but it may be a couple years before, even a year or so after. But that's still pretty early for a Cintiq.
Yeah, he seems like he'd be a seeker, like a guy who would play with different tools if he had the opportunity to just see what he could pull out of it. Man, it's that old thing that we talk about where it's like the tool isn't the thing, man. It's the guy who's wielding that little stylus.
Yeah, and with somebody like Mobius, the tool really isn't the thing. I've imagined that guy could make magic with anything.
But seeing him draw some of those pieces with the dip pen was a sight to frickin' behold. I could have watched 5,000 hours of just that. It's a kayfabed setup in as much as like the inkwell is on over top of the drawing, like say at 11 o'clock. And you just can't imagine that he's going to be reaching over with like the potentiality of like dropping a dab of ink on your stuff. You put it over to the side. If you're left-handed, put it to the left. If you're right, put it to the right. But so like the setup was a little bit kayfabed, and that kind of stuff is unfortunate to me because I want to see the like what's the real deal. Like you see Droulier in his space. It's a beautiful space. Like there is, like how would you put it? It's a big open space with like maybe like a 30-foot ceiling, but there's a second floor, so you could stand on the second floor, and there's like guardrails and stuff, and you like shoot the camera down and see Droulier with a big giant piece of paper using like straight edges to create one of his compositions that are with the symmetry, but he has a cigarette in hand, so like seeing that ash get bigger and stuff, that was making me nervous.
It also his space is filled, like every flat surface is covered. Droulet we're talking about. That was fascinating to me, where he's like drawing on top of other stuff, it even looked like.
Yeah.
So that may have been a little bit kayfabe, but boy, did his space resemble when I think of his artwork as being like every inch filled with marks. reflective of his studio setup, at least in the footage that we see there.
Yeah, for sure, man.
That's the thing with a documentary like this, is you've got to have the guy drawing. You have
Yeah.
to, you know, like, especially now, like if it's somebody that's older and maybe there's just no footage of it, you're stuck with what you're stuck with. But if the guy's still alive and vibrant, it's like you got to get some footage of drawing, and they do that. And that's one of those things, you know, if you're checking off what makes this a good documentary or not, you can check that off. There's some drawing, you know, you get to see some drawing in here.
Get into the humble upbringings, art school, excelling at art school, yada yada. Sells his first work at age 14, 15.
Mm-hmm.
And he recognizes, like, how cool was that? You know, he said, and they show some of that stuff. And I was actually studying it really close, man. I was pausing on those parts because what they show is stuff that would have been black and white. And it was like these cartoony Western tales. And like working in black and white right now, like I'm very conscious of that, to try to figure out how to separate shapes, because you don't have the benefits of color
Right.
to separate foreground, middle ground, background. And that's something I'm still working on, still kind of struggling with, because I always had extra tools. It's like the project I'm working on now, it's the first time where I want to like not have that kind of safety net and just like really try to figure stuff out. So seeing at that level, him working was pretty freaking awesome.
Mobius is an interesting guy to study for that, because, like, you know, in my head it's like I think of guys like a Mike Mignola,
Yeah.
but he's using big black areas, and
Right.
Mobius is using a lot of line art. It's a very different way of, like, how do you create depth with just line art and maybe a little bit of hatching or a little bit of these extra marks. So interesting artist to study for depth, because it's something he's very, very good at.
Totally. It was a revelation that, like, say around his like third year of art school, his mom divorces his dad or whatever, marries a Mexican fella, and they go off to Mexico. So Mobius decides to kind of stop his educational pursuits, goes to Mexico, and when they show the broad vistas and things, and it juxtaposed with his artwork, it all makes sense.
Yeah, for some reason I was not aware that he had spent like a year in Mexico at a formative time. And yes, whatever he was learning at art school, I feel like that time spent in Mexico, right up there with the quality of whatever he was getting out of the art school experience, because it did totally jive with the artwork that I associate with him. Those landscapes and things, man, the footage that they juxtapose, and again, good on the filmmakers, right?
Yeah.
They're talking about his art style and Mexico's influence, and the stuff they're showing from Mexican landscapes fits right in. So pretty good piece there, but also something I just didn't know about him.
Totally.
And it kind of makes sense too that then the connection later in life with Jodorowsky, I can't help but think there's some crossover as a result.
Right, and of course that's the time where they get Jodorowsky in there to sort of comment on those little bits and pieces. They showed some stuff from his Blueberry work at that point when they were talking about the landscapes, and it was an interesting shot, because usually you think of like the vast, like you see the horizon line and the kind of vast expanse that Mobius is able to convey, but they showed a top-down view, and it would be like, say, like a train or something on some tracks, like shooting down at, you know, a plateau or like one of these weird structures, and so much minute detail in that line art. It made me think of Jeff, you know, because it was like would be all these like little rock formations that are so minuscule, so minute, but like totally thought about and considered.
Yeah, they early on in the doc, they kind of established that Mobius is almost like multiple people in
Right.
terms of his art style. And I think Blueberry is one of those where you really see a divide from like some of his science fiction,
Absolutely.
more fantastic stuff. So they do try to, I don't know about explain, but they do try to make that point that it's almost like he's kind of embodied a few different artists over the years and goes back and forth between these different artists that live within him.
The things that this is missing the doc is missing is some of the sort of chemical pursuits that he's taken, because with the surrealism of the sci-fi stuff, it doesn't look like the work of a straight person. Like, I don't see Steve Ditko or Kirby being able to like hit these kind of visionary images. I think you got to have your third eye opened.
That's interesting, man. I'm with you for the most part there, except I think those two examples are the toughest ones to do, because they do weird stuff.
They do, but it's square. Like it's weird the way Klaus's patience is weird. You know, like you can tell there's a constipated vision to what they're doing. And the guys who, like, when I went to art school, to a man, I could fucking identify, like, okay, this dude fucks with acid, this dude fucks with acid, and I was 100% right. You know, so like there's some extra thing. It's kind of like when we play that game, and it's like here's the art style. Like people who mess around with psychedelics and shit, they draw different.
Yeah.
And Mobius definitely pulls. So I would like to hear about that kind of shit, because then you would have the opportunity to have Jodorowsky. Like imagine that would be the first times you hear ayahuasca ever mentioned. All that kind of shit.
You know what? This is going to be a little bit of a tangent. One of my last notes on here is about Crumb.
Right.
And seeing certain parallels between Crumb and Mobius. And the big one is the timelines. So early on, Mobius makes this comment about his standing in comics is due to a new kind of reader, the result of social upheaval. So this is getting into the 60s, right? Like Blueberry, I think, starts in maybe 63, which also is a connection to like Marvel Universe, you know, to give you context of what's happening in comics globally or historically. And that's pretty fascinating. But, you know, so much pop culture, the 60s is that time of like radical change. And I haven't heard this idea of like social upheaval and a new reader emerging. I've never heard it, I don't think, in conjunction with American comics, even though like the underground comics start to show up in the mid to late 60s. And then, of course, that is a different reader. So I saw some real parallels there, and that's a road I wish they would have gone down further because, like, again, I don't hear people, you know, I don't hear Frank Miller talk about how in the 60s different readers suddenly showed up.
Right.
And, you know, it may be the case that did happen, or maybe in the 80s different readers showed up in American comics, but that concept of like a new reader showed up, and then it was like, well, what do we do for them? Right. You know, Mobius, the way this documentary puts it, you know, it's kind of like his work, and especially the stuff that he was doing as Mobius, would have serviced this new reader. Where'd that new reader come from? Who else is observing that and benefiting from it or creating work for it? And I find that concept really interesting because it's not one I've heard discussed within comics. And I'm not discounting it. Yeah. I think there may be some real validity to it based on just the way pop culture evolves in the 60s. And most of my filter of 1960s is viewed through American pop culture. So it's interesting to think, like, is this a global phenomena? Like, and it probably was.
Yeah.
You know, it probably was. So I thought all that was interesting and stuff that I really don't think about much whenever I think about Mobius or any of these comic artists. And it's like Mobius, Undergrounds, Marvel Comics appealing to college students. Like, there were a lot of these forces that were maybe changing the audience of comics in that decade.
It's real fascinating at the time because the early part of that decade, believe it or not, and it was just very recently, Ed Norton's wife from Honeymooners passed away, like 2-3 days ago. And I'm like, how could she be alive?
Yes.
But then I looked at when the Honeymooners was really on, it's like 62. Now, there were skits from earlier, like laugh-in type shows that were Honeymooners skits, and maybe they cobbled those into other episodes. But it is much like Fantastic Four is coming out when Honeymooners is on. So that's what your parents are watching, but then you kids are fucking with peyote caps and like shit like that. So like, you know, the inmates are running the asylum, dude. When you have the latchkey kids doing their thing, they're going to get into some shit.
Yeah, that throws my timeline off.
Pilote magazine comes up. That's where Blueberry shows up. And there is a comic called Spiro, that like whenever you're in France, whenever you're in Europe, you just see this little fucker everywhere. He's super popular everywhere but the United States. So I get the way that they were selling it, and forgive me for being ignorant of this, but the way that it seemed that they were selling it was like the guy who makes Spyro was the writer of Blueberry. Did you get that? Because like Mobius is saying that like, oh, you know, I love your work, blah blah blah. That's the magazine where Spyro's showing up now, and then like let's work on a because there is a writer for Blueberry. Yeah. So is he the writer?
I don't know. I kind of glossed over that part, possibly.
But long tradition in pop culture of like other cultures embracing the American Western.
Right.
Spaghetti Western, it's Italy. Garth Ennis comes to mind with his interest in the West. And because Stan Lee is quoted as saying something like, who would have thought a Frenchman would, how can he be French making these Western books?
Yes, Stanley basically coming in contact with Blueberry and being shocked to learn that it's a French artist, but recognizing the quality of them. Yeah, he also says something like, he met his deadlines. You know, part of maintaining that series or that series success. That's some of what he attributes to it. Which, man, I've looked at a lot of those books. There's a lot more to them than meeting deadlines.
Oh, totally. And what's fascinating is that they they don't do the artist any favors, but he talks about, like, yeah, it was so successful that Blueberry continues, and they show some more modern Blueberry stuff, and it's fine, it's okay, but it ain't Mobius, and it is evident that you could tell on the screen that it's not him. But you know, when we talk about so making deadlines, right? That's jobber talk, and we've established that the work it is not jobber work, but he was feeling the jobber grind. When he's like, I feel like I'm at war inside, you know, like I have this burning desire to do this other thing, but this is paying the bills. I need this other vector to get these other ideas out. And then that's when he starts moonlighting as doing the Mobius thing. And it turns out that there are guys like Drulier and like two other dudes.
Bilal.
Yeah, and I guess maybe
Deone. I don't know how to pronounce his name.
Right.
Boinnet. Those are the four that come up in this documentary. And I wrote this down because he's talking about the work that he was aiming for and then starting to do as these guys get together, and that, you know, that clash against whatever the traditional was,
right,
and wanting to do something new. These are the words that I think Mobius says in the documentary: transgressive, subversive, surreal, avant-garde, bizarre sci-fi. I just think it's a different conversation these guys are having about art making and comics compared to the conversations that were happening historically here at that time. It's so funny, too, to think of those, because I come to Mobius late 80s, you know, probably when Epic is probably come across like an Epic reprint. Maybe that Silver Surfer Mobius book would have been one of my early Mobius comics. And whatever revolution those guys enacted with Meadow Hurlant, it's in the past for me. You know what I mean? Like, in my mind, they're not transgressive and subversive. They are just awesome.
Right.
But it's interesting to think, like, to get to that point of being awesome or being available, they did have to, like, kick down some barriers. And that would have been done in the 70s, maybe the mid-70s. I think Meadow Hurlant, 1974. You know, so around that time, they're really pushing the boundaries and trying to do something else with comics. 15 years later, you take it for granted because that mark has been made, and then, you know, a generation has been following in those footsteps. So kind of normal to me in 1989, but in 1974, it's like, this is some new stuff.
It's a fascinating notion, right? Because, like, these are people who sort of, he talks about growing up reading Spiro, right? So in the same way that the Americans were reading, you know, their Walt Kelly and their Carl Barkses and so, which was kid stuff, then you get a Robert Crumb who might play with that style but push it in very subversive directions, and then you have Mobius and his crew doing a version of that. They certainly have way more cultural stuff happening around them, which makes it lean in one direction or the other. Think even like, you know, French New Wave stuff, like you had to go to special theaters to be able to see that kind of stuff here. So and it is the French that coined the term ninth art. I think as comics is the ninth art, right? Which I think they recently said that video games are the 10th, which is an interesting thing. So it's a much more like art based kind of culture, and, you know, they went in the direction that they did, and they said immediately, dudes are knocking on the door. How do I get in there? It would have been a tangent, and maybe this is something you could discover in some other written interviews, but I do wonder how, like, Corbin fits into that, because it seems like he gets involved pretty early, and his style seems far too lush to be relegated to the undergrounds for his whole life, you know, especially with, like, what he can do with color and stuff, because he was playing with that color on the covers. So, like, you know, that's a curious tangent.
He talks about being in, like, a translate state for some of this stuff.
Yeah.
And it makes me think of, like, other artists who have talked that way. Like Alan Moore has kind of talked about the idea that we're almost like radio, you know, like we're almost receiving these waves.
Right.
And it kind of reminds me of that whenever somebody says translate state, but it makes me think, like, how does Corbin show up and look like he's perfectly in step with these guys, and yet he's doing it thousands of miles away
in the middle of nowhere
without the benefit of conversation? He's not calling these guys on the phone and they're talking about their new ideas, and yet whenever they show some of the Corbin covers from Meadow Hurlant in this documentary, and it's like they look perfectly in line with this stuff, and it adds to that idea of, like, when ideas show up, they show up like kind of everywhere. It's almost like the spot, like you're seeing spots on the map light up as like these ideas are suddenly finding reception. And it's like Corbin was channeling the same. There's so much in common with that stuff, especially compared to the other stuff that would have been around Corbin at the time, where it's like, this is alien artwork compared to almost everything else that's happening, like say in American comics.
Right.
But then you put it in the context of Metal Hurlant, and it's like, oh, there's simpatico. These guys are thinking similar thoughts, even though, their style's still different, but it makes sense. But it's just amazing to me that this is happening around the world.
100 Monkeys, man.
Yes, yeah. It's weird because, again, that translate thing is not something that I hear in comics. Maybe little pockets of it. I think of, you mentioned Patience. Klaus, whenever he was doing like a Velvet Glove Cast in Iron, would use his dreams a little bit. So, maybe that's a similar concept, where like you're pulling ideas out of somewhere, but not necessarily the foreground of your consciousness.
We got to cut that one part out about the honeymooners, man, because like it was 55. I was reading something, I swear to God, this past week where it said 60. So thank you very much, Optics Binding. I had to look that up because I'm like, man, I really don't believe everything you see on the internet. Cut. All right, we're back into the mix. Mobius, when he starts hitting with Metal Hurlant, he cites four big works, and the first is that Destination one.
And we have a video of that.
Yeah.
So check that out if you're unfamiliar with that strip.
And it's a small strip. Maybe it even showed up in P-Lot or someplace.
I think it did, and I think that's his first. He credits that as his first Mobius.
The shot across the bow, like some new comics are here. So that's the first one. He cites Arzak, which probably showed up in the first Metal Hurlant. In fact, the cover is that big monster from Heavy Metal 2 in America, which we have an episode of. And Airtight Garage. But then there's like a fourth story that he mentions that the title escapes me. It's several words in French. But the image that they showed with that, I didn't recognize. So it's like, man, is there a Mobius comic out there that I don't know? And he calls that the end of his ejaculation.
Yes, and that's when he splits from Droulet.
Right. Droulet, like, he's fun. There's a move that one can do. And I'll do it with Jim Forever, where Droulet is like, Mobius is older than me. And he'll say that, the Mobius has some years on me. And it's just that's a great hedge to just say that, like, I have more time, like I have some more time to kind of like, catch up to that level, man. So, and Droulet does that, he makes it a point to say that. So, Mobius is a little older and stuff. And they break off and shit, which I guess, there's a back end business component to Heavy Metal, of course. Because like when they talk about like quit working together and stuff, and it's like, it's a comic anthology. It's not like you putting your hands on each other's pages.
Yeah, I got the impression that they were more connected. And it's not that they're working on the same strips, but they may be meeting regularly and kind of talking philosophy on what they're making. Almost pushing each other through this ongoing conversation. And that makes sense to me because I often think, like, whenever we start hanging out, it really advances my ability to make comics. Having people that I can talk to or show something new
Absolutely.
to. And so that was my impression of what they're describing there. Like, I think those guys, while not working on the same page, were working and maybe showing their work to each other and talking about it and doing new stuff, and both of them pushing in that new direction. So that was kind of how I took that. It was interesting. I mean, they make it a deal in the movie. Like, it's a moment where it's like, we split. And
it makes sense because, like, you always associate, like, Droulet is always the also-ran. When you talk about those comics, French sci-fi, Mobius is number one always, and then Droulet, like, comes next. And, like, nobody wants to be Dave Mustaine, so, like, he's got some of that scar tissue that he exercises, like, on the camera and stuff. And it just talks about, like, I have respect for him, but that's all. Like just, I respect him. That's it. And that was like his swan song, like on the documentary. But then we get to Hollywood, right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
And
Jodorowsky bringing him basically into the Hollywood machine via Dune, even though I guess they were doing that in France, and it falls apart. But it is the hey, let's make a movie. You're a master of images. I want to see this movie in images.
If we would have seen this documentary when it came out, like if we were in the UK or something, we would have been hipped to Jodorowsky's Dune 10 years, 5 years before the big documentary came out. And that documentary, like, there will be a video on that at some point on the Kayfabe channel, because like that would be worth rewatching. And it's a video that I encourage like any of my creative friends who have not seen it to check it out. And the value of it really is in not being precious with your original singular idea if it goes up in smoke, because in that failure there is no Jodorowsky's Dune. There's David Lynch's Dune, and it sucks. And but what came from that, shit, even Star Wars came from that. The way that they suggest, some of the fight scenes and stuff. Alien came from that. Blade Runner came from that. The creation of Cyberpunk came from that with Dan O'Bannon and Mobius doing their Long Tomorrow. Is that what it's called?
Yes.
We have several videos.
Yes, we do. Even with Jeff Darrow joins us on one of those. One of the giant influential comic strips. And that one's amazing to me because it's 14 pages maybe or something. It's shorter than a comic book length. And one of the most influential comics probably, of the time period. Right.
They only allude to it, and O'Bannon is cool on that thing, man. They don't show any of his roughs, unfortunately. It was the Kayfabers who sort of hipped us to that. But he provided roughs for the work, and he talked about what Mobius would do is he curled the toes of that monster that's on that dude's crotch, and he's like, just by curling the toes, you don't have to have a thought balloon in this panel. The toes say it all.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fun, having him kind of weigh in on it. It's always neat to have an artist talk about another artist because they have insight, and the respect that comes out of O'Bannon in terms of what Mobius does, how he elevates that material, very fun.
Totally, and it was a function of O'Bannon, who was going to be tasked with doing the special effects, bringing the Giger artwork for Dune and bringing the Mobius artwork for Dune into practical effects. That was what he at least on the script that they showed. That was going to be his responsibility. He mentioned how fast Mobius was, which I heard from a lot of people. Mm-hmm. And he said Mobius was just tired of O'Bannon up his ass, basically, while they're working on this thing. Mobius is like, go write a comic for me. And then that's how that story comes along. He says I want to put it in my Metal Hurlant magazine. So I'm imagining that while Mobius is working on this, he's still keeping that going too.
Yeah, O'Bannon says that he basically goes away and then sees it, and I think he sees it in Heavy Metal. So they must have maybe published about simultaneously, but he kind of goes away and doesn't see the comic, doesn't see the finished comic, and then sees it in print and very impressed by it.
Yeah.
So at that time, Mobius does go to Hollywood, works on Alien and Tron, and kind of talks about Hollywood and what it means to him. It's a real, I don't want to use the word validation, but Hollywood had such, rule over our imaginations visually at that time. Think late 70s, early 80s. And Mobius is very respectful of Hollywood and its power. And, moves to LA whenever he gets a chance and works there. It's another chapter in his storied career. And it's fascinating to think about because I don't feel like we view Hollywood that way now. But at the time, I guess it's the only game in town. Now people are shooting Academy Award nominated films on their phones.
Right.
You don't need the Southern California light or that industry now. And so I think the way we view it has changed. We've also seen behind the door quite a bit more maybe than you do back then. But very eager, it seemed, Mobius to go to Hollywood and participate in that machine.
Somebody in the chat is mentioning one of the great quotes from Jodorowsky in the documentary was that he approached Mobius to do that artwork for the Dune project. Mobius was being wishy-washy, and Jodorowsky's like, I'll just get Juliet to do it then. And Mobius like, no, I'm on board. Let's do it.
Yeah.
Let's go, man.
Jodorowsky is a compelling figure. That dude has charisma when at least when the camera's on him. I felt that way with the Dune, the Jodorowsky's Dune documentary, and I felt like it on this documentary too, man. He some Stan Lee-isms in there. Like, I think he knows when that red light is on, and he goes into his performer mode. Or maybe he's always that way. But
it's cult leader Riz, man.
He's on whenever the camera's on, for sure.
I would never want to meet him. I would never want to be caught up in the spell. I've heard firsthand stories about how he kind of can get you in the web and stuff. And he had his hooks in Mobius for many years. Like, probably the bulk of Mobius pages have Jodorowsky's stamp on it.
That's interesting.
And it's the charisma, like that could certainly to like a self-effacing artist or an introverted kind of artist. Like, he knows what to do and what to say. You could just see him on that screen, and he has the wonder words and shit.
Man, it's funny. You can almost see him as like dictator, cult leader. There's all these different positions where I feel like he would have excelled.
Yeah.
And we got him as storyteller, which is probably
lucky for everybody.
Yes.
Because
that works out well.
There might be a Jodo brand on a whole bunch of girls' butt cheeks or something like that, man. If he would have went in one direction or the other.
But it also reminds me, like, whenever you'll see like someone who's violent or something, they almost can spot the other person that has that tendency.
Straight up. And
I feel like Jodorowsky's super creative, right? Just ideas going in every direction from his head, almost like kindred spirit whenever he bumps into Mobius, where it's like, oh, this is another one of these dudes that has the energy.
Yeah, what did he call them? Because like when he amassed this crew, it's a Voltron he made, and it was in the Jodorowsky documentary where he's like, my spiritual warriors.
There you go.
He called them, and like that's his his word for like not a jobber.
Well, he's a master linguist. Like using word spiritual warrior. Like, that's something. I'd be like collaborator, or my artist or whatever, work for hire artist. He has that thing, that turn of phrase.
He explains it though, and not in this piece, but in the Dune piece, and it is about like you just ain't punching a fucking clock. You're putting your own personal vision, your own personal demons into the work, and it's clear you have your own kind of ideas and things. So like that's what he means by it. He defines it in the documentary. But yeah, it's like so much of their work becomes comics, because when Dune goes away, Jodorowsky is now becomes a comic writer for a big chunk of time in the 80s there, man.
I mean, still to this day, I think he continues to write comics. Must have been a medium that he found, pleasing.
Certainly cheaper than making flicks. That's for
probably
damn
a
sure.
lot easier too than convincing a crew and backers and producers. They say that the reason the Dune movie doesn't happen is they can't get the wide enough distribution in America,
right,
to justify the budget.
Yeah, it's interesting because like they had because they could have filmed it. Like he said, they had the money to make it, but in order to recoup anything, you need 1,000 theaters, and they couldn't get a guarantee of 1,000 theaters.
Yeah, it's wild. It's so interesting. Like I've never heard people quite describe a movie project in that way. Really interesting.
Right. And like that's the thing, like I've been watching a lot of stuff about the making of movies and things. And there's like there's a video called like the Hideki Anno problem where they go through all of Anno's career, and when they were talking about Nausicaa with Miyazaki, there was like a certain length and they wanted like a half-hour cutout, because like you cut out that half hour, now it can play 8 times in a day at a single theater. So like there's all those considerations that have to sort of be met.
I feel like Hollywood's done a good job of keeping that kind of talk out.
Right.
It's gotten through at this point. Everything's kind of transparent, but that was not a topic of conversation for like when I was in high school, for instance, and being reading everything you can behind the scenes on films or whatever you like.
Yeah.
It was pretty quiet.
Well, how's it work now where it's like fucking movies are 3 hours and they could play 3 times in a day on a screen?
It's a good question. I have no idea.
So the Hollywood stuff, to me, it's whatever. I've never seen Tron. Like all that I've ever seen of Tron is like the little bit that's on there, and I'm like, wow, that's some dated looking shit.
I watched Tron as an adult. Like I probably saw a little bit as a kid, whenever it played, but I didn't know what it was really. And I watched it in like 2002 or 2003 and enjoyed it.
Yeah.
So maybe worth a spin.
So now we get into American comics, and this is where the Stan Lee part, Jim Lee, and Mignola start to show up. It talks about meeting Stan Lee out there in Glittertown, and they're having what Mobius considers to be maybe just like a frivolous kind of conversation, just a little bit of frivolous chit chat,
Bump into each other at a party.
oh yeah, like let's do something someday. And the way Mobius describes the French way of collaboration is you just forget about it.
Maybe in 6 months.
Laissez-faire.
Yes.
And you know, like when talking to Darrow, it seems like everything is that way. Like if your gutters come down on your house, the guy who will fix it will be there in 3 weeks, maybe, and take several breaks and shit like that. The very next day, the script shows up on Mobius's doorstep. This is where they explain the Marvel method and how interested he was in working in that format. Stan Lee called it a detailed outline. I do wonder how detailed it was. And the benefits for Mobius was being able to lay the story out graphically.
That's right.
Which he was very excited about.
Yeah, he explains it really clearly in a way that I think, like, we've lost something in comics
Right.
with the hyper detailed script.
Yeah.
Because, like, where does the artist exist in that?
Right.
You know, they become just an illustrator, and it does not take advantage of the medium and certainly doesn't allow you to shape the story graphically. So I thought that was kind of cool to hear that insight.
Totally.
Because that can be a bit of a throwaway comic, I think, if you're not cognizant of the conditions under which it was made. And it seems like Mobius was game, you know, and took that plot and really, like, applied himself to it. They show some cool panels, too, in the documentary.
Right. And yeah, some good Galactus shots and things. And this is where, you know, Jim Lee is talking about the style, but more specifically, Mignola is talking about, like, seeing those pages come in and is so hopeful about where American comics are going to kind of take their turn and things. And I guess Jim Lee's a part of this too. And it really just illustrates the sort of constipated nature of the Wednesday Warrior, because they spend minutes on just your casual comics fan, or not even casual, but like your voracious comics fan who uses that as a source of entertainment rather than like artistic medium, appreciation of an artistic medium. They do not want change. Jim Lee illustrates that even the change of a hairstyle will receive volleys of invective. So the audience really wasn't showing up for Silver Surfer, Parable. I could believe that a lot. Certainly running this channel and seeing some of the chatter that comes back, absolutely. And then Mignola was so excited that, like, well, maybe now, like, you know, we'll get some fresh work from the Europeans. We'll bring translations over.
Yeah.
I'll be able to read some of that stuff. They'll be within our system and create fresh new works. And Mignola's like, nothing happened.
Nothing.
Zero happened. Maybe they would have a guy come over, think about your, we have a video of this, Milo Manera doing his X-Woman book. He cites, like, you know, the guys coming over doing Batman, and probably Batman Black and White was out at this point. And Mignola's just like, probably the last thing he says is like, I've seen enough Batman. You know, like, while it's interesting to see, you know, Katsuhiro Otomo do Batman, I've seen enough Batman.
Yeah. Jodorowsky weighs in on the Silver Surfer.
What's he say, Jimmy? And quote.
Well, I got two. One is Mobius is the artist, Stan Lee the businessman industry.
Right. Yeah, that's good.
Makes sense, but also it does illustrate, I think, that Marvel method and the potential of working that way. If you have an artist in the equation, you may get something special.
Right.
The other thing he says, and I have in quotes, Superman makes me vomit.
That's your quote?
That's my quote.
How about I shit on the United States? He says.
I feel like that's the same. Hates the superhero, though. And I think that's illustrative of a lot of the world. Like, there's a real American ideology mixed in with the superhero concept. Alan Moore, I think, has written and talked extensively about this concept, and Jodorowsky just minces no words in his assessment.
As he's assessing it, he also uses the word religion around the superheroes, and I think that's what you can sort of use when talking about that Wednesday Warrior who doesn't want the New 52 to exist because it obliterates their previous canon and shit. You know, it obliterates their first testament of their religion, of their scripture. then it gets into a little personal stuff, man. He, has one family, divorces, gets a new bride, and I bring that up because it sort of is the end to the piece, but there's also more Jodorowsky talk, and he talks about the new wife is like, yeah, these cartoonist wives, man, they're all the same. They're very strong women because they're babies. Like what do artists do? Like they sit around and draw all day, so they're fucking children. They're in a childlike headspace, so they need a mother figure to kind of haggle with the contracts and stuff. And he was kind of not mocking her, but kind of like, you imagine kind of going over some of the conversations that he probably has had with her and had some frustrations. And we don't get much fucking Mobius work in America in translation. And I think that maybe some of those, you got to relax a little bit of that, maybe, man, because it is sad to not have like the primo Mobius works here in the States. Like whenever they were announcing the big Dark Horse bit, so stoked, right? We're getting Mobius again, and it's Adina, and it's colored in a computer, and it's kind of wonky and stuff. Get Arzak back on the fucking stands, man.
I mentioned this recently on an episode, and it's just what European stuff sells. Because that's the bottom line here. If they're not doing Mobius, it's because it's not meeting some sort of financial level that his caretakers expect or
exactly
require.
They're placing a value on it, and the value is not commensurate with what can come back from the American publishers.
Yeah, and like pretty much as long as I've liked comics, Mobius has been held in this super high regard. So if I would see a Mobius that I could afford, I'd go home with it. Everybody doesn't feel that way, and in fact, I would say the majority of American comics consumers don't feel that way, and it really does make me wonder, like, why that is, and then what are the top European successes here? Where do they rank? Is there something that is really successful enough that it can make it here, as a European import and generate the kind of revenue that a world-class artist expects?
I think some of that that you bring up, man, I feel like some of that is the Field of Dreams argument. The culture has been starved of his work for 3 decades before Dark Horse started putting out their stuff. They didn't put their best foot forward. The 4 books that he names as being his great fucking ejaculation, it's none of those.
Yeah, you'd think that would be the thing to start with.
Exactly. So like, if you build it, they will come. That's your Field of Dreams thing, right? So like, if it was there, I could make the argument, like, it's arresting imagery, man. Like, I didn't know Mobius from anybody. And when I saw Arzak, like, I saw the first heavy metal I picked up was issue 2, where he has that monster painted on the cover. And it's an effect. It's I guess it might be issue 1 of Metal Hurlant, because that's the first Arzak is in there too, And when I saw that with no real, I could have bought any issue, because at Phantom they were all $5, even issue 1, because I think they kept them things just in print, or like they printed so many of them that like every issue was $5. And I'm like, I'm scooping this one up. If they would have had issue 3, I probably would have left with that one. And what I'm saying is that the imagery is so arresting, with no baggage of anything. I had nobody to talk to. I had no fandom feelings or anything. I'm just like, what is this? This is coming home with me. And then seeing it and just being mind blown. 2.5, 3 decades worth of readers didn't get the opportunity to have their mind blown in that way. If they did, they went online, and I bet you, if I fire up the old torrents and stuff and type his name in, I bet you there's a lot of people seeing his comics in a bootleg space. So they're out there. It's just like they haven't given it a shot in decades. So like the audience needs to be primed a little bit. So
it's that thing too where the books would go out of print. Like I think of the Marvel Epic Mobius stuff, and the prices would just shoot up. So they may not have sold that well, but then once they get out of print, it's like the people that want it badly.
Right.
But maybe that number, it's not X-Men reader numbers or manga reader numbers or whatever. The last piece that I have from the documentary is there's a lot of talk about ego, identity, kind of a psychoanalysis. That's my writing that, it's not quoting, on the part of Mobius and kind of talking about this art making. And that is what brought me back to the Crumb part. Mm-hmm. The one quote is, puts all his energy into his drawings, Mobius.
Right.
but it reminds me so much of Crumb, and their timelines are so similar, and it does feel like both of them kind of brought a new comics style to the page, to the audience, and new audiences. You know,
Right.
that underground audience is a different audience than what you were getting on newsstands in America, and Mobius alludes to the different audience. So I kind of find it fascinating that those two have a certain amount of parallel between the two of them, and I wonder, like, if they've crossed paths. Great drawers tend to admire one another's work.
Right.
So I would expect that those two have probably looked at each other's drawings and comics with some, batting their eyelashes at those beautiful drawings. And it just makes me wonder if there's some stuff on record of those two crossing paths somewhere, talking about one another's work at all. Because it does seem like Mobius, has super French influence and everything that brings with it, and Crumb having kind of the Americana in his background. But there still feels like there's a lot of crossover in terms of what they're bringing to the page and the subtext of what they're bringing to their drawings.
Yeah, I want to direct people to when I was in Japan with Jeff Darrow, we were taking a look at a couple of Taiyo Matsumoto monographs. Jeff is a person we know who was closest with Mobius, like first-hand accounts and things. And when we were looking through the Matsumoto art books, 100 and 101 were the titles of the art books, we got to some of the parts of the book that look like he was woodshedding some, I guess maybe number 5 pieces, which is the Matsumoto kind of homage to Mobius kind of image making. And Jeff, we talk about the crosshatch and stuff, and Jeff was like, I always felt that that Mobius got the crosshatch stuff like from Crumb, like he said it. And it's a very different approach. It's clearly his own hand and stuff, but that's one degree of separation. Talking about this stuff, and it is interesting because there is a Mount Rushmore of like world cartoonists, and it's like Mobius, it's Crumb, and I do put Otomo on that as well. And there were those Otomo. There's one Tankobon with one story that has a paste up of Fritz the Cat behind the characters as they're talking. And it's clear it's Robert Crumb work, so like these guys, they know each other. It's got to be. Think about like who can Neil deGrasse Tyson like really have a conversation with, It's a very small amount of people, right. And I feel like artists of that stripe, like who can they really talk to, Like they could talk to, any old person who makes a comic, on a very superficial level, but I do feel like those guys are pulling from a different set of tools that maybe only they can sort of navigate. But that said, it could be a Jack Kirby, Alex Toth conversation.
Very much so. The common thing there is just it feels like it all starts from the drawing. And certainly not every comic is built that way. Not every cartoonist is built that way. But in the case of Mobius, it really feels like again and again in that documentary, it goes back to that. It's just about the drawing.
Highly recommend the documentary. It's something that, man, I've been trying to like carve the time to see, and I had to kind of manipulate my profession in order to check it out, man. Like I could feel productive if we make it an episode. Here it is. Check it out. I'll even let's make sure that we put a link in the description below so that people can click and check it out. I got a lot out of seeing it. I probably shouldn't have watched it late at night as I watched it because it just made me want to fucking draw. I wanted to get back at it. Very inspirational. There are lots of pieces, obviously, that are in French, so it's something that you have to sit and watch when Mobius starts talking, which was sort of one of the reasons why I haven't seen it in such a long time, or ever. So keep that in mind. You can't be casual. It can't be background music unless you're bilingual.
Hey, and I'll add this too. We talk about gratitude.
Yeah.
Very grateful to live in a time period where like I can stay at home and just do a search and watch this video.
Absolutely.
What a rich time. Yeah. Like I said, when I was a kid, you would buy whatever Mobius you crossed your path because it was so hard to find any of it. And now, you can watch this during your lunch hour from pretty much anywhere on Earth.
Absolutely, man. You good to go, Jimmy?
Yes.
All right, man. There was that recording. Thanks, guys, for joining us, and thanks for some of the help in the chat room there, man. Arctic Binding. I have no idea why I saw such a late date on that Honeymooners stuff. That made me say that. So we got to make sure that piece is cut out because I just don't want to look like a fucking fool. But yeah, 55. That feels so much. That feels right.
Did it air until 62?
Dude, it's actually I was just looking at the Wikipedia. It's so fewer episodes than it's like 30 episodes.
Yeah, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah, or like 36 episodes. So it's not 40 episodes. Fun. Like I figure this thing will be called like In Search of Mobius. Have a good photo of him on there or something, and yeah, we'll see. Because like Mobius does very well for the channel. Let me get some sips in. We're going to be shooting our little introductions for our various videos, and then take like a 15-minute break and set up in the other room. What you looking at, Jimmy?
That Savage Dragon cover.
Want to do your intros to start?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of what my intros are. What videos are we doing?
Yeah, we don't need an intro for Mobius because we got that. You chose like Gen 13 Ordinary Heroes.
Oh yeah.
Savage Dragon, and I was thinking like, like try to come up with some sort of pun or something. But like I think if you go as simple as like, it's like Eric Larson went too far on this Savage Dragon because like because he's so political to the left, like the right wing fucking looks for any opportunity to like roast him. So there's like a lot of fodder for that. So if you just put a title up that's like Eric Larson went way too far. And I was trying to think of like how you get like the far side, but like don't even bother. Like just keep it more simple. And then that'll get the righty tighties, man, to kind of like click on the shit and bolster the views and stuff. So that's my thought with that thing.
Okay.
Which one you call it out first, okay?
Yeah.
And then once again, make sure that number starts ticking and you'll be good. So I'm gonna hit it.
Savage Dragon. Eric Larson is known for pushing the envelope on his comic book Savage Dragon. This time, he may have gone too far.
Excellent.
I could probably do the Adam Hughes as well.
Do it.
Gen 13. Gen 13 turns out to be a runaway hit for Image Comics. They start opening the door to other creators. Adam Hughes comes in and takes a crack at the Gen 13 team in one of the best Gen 13 comics of all time.
Maybe. Actually, I think I would love to read more of his writing, like his full cartoon. Did he write that thing?
Yes, and I don't want to step on it because I think that's going to be a lot of what we talk about.
Yeah.
But I am also thumbs up on it.
Yeah, very surprising.
Yeah.
Because
very pleasant surprise.
Yeah, like...
Because there are a lot of words. Like, typically it would be the kind of thing where I'd be like, man, this is embarrassing. It's pretty good.
Yeah.
What else do we have in there? We've got Omega Red, the X-Men. Omega Red.
Yeah.
Why can I not remember all these comics?
Super Soldier, Amalgam.
Oh, yeah.
And then the way that I think this should be sold is the best Amalgam comic, ?
Yeah.
And just keep it vague. So with this intro, keep it vague. We might be looking at the best Amalgam comic. Is that true? I don't know. But like, you hedge it with the question. Good?
Yeah. Amalgam. In the late 90s, Marvel and DC combined their characters to make the ultimate super crossover or the ultimate cash grab. They hotshotted the territory. Did they produce any good comics? We might be looking at the best Amalgam comic today. What do you think?
Can you grab me that wizard? I want to see the date.
Yeah, that's part of what I was looking over there for.
November of 96.
When does Marvel declare bankruptcy? Isn't it late 96? Like, it should be coming up. It's got to be in the next couple of issues.
Right.
And it does not sound like anybody's expecting it. You know what I mean? There's no storm cloud on the horizon. The only warning that I see is crossover everything.
I think I see some warnings, and I think it has to do with the creative teams. With Jeff Loeb leaving X-Force and Cable, I think it's like, this ain't bringing in the royalties that it once was. I'll go do some other shit.
I think there's some story in the top 100 books, because if you look out of the top 20 or 25 books, something like 20 of them are X books.
Right.
It's nuts.
Yeah.
I mean, it is like, holy shit. And you got to think, like, Claremont should get royalties on every one of those books.
Oh, I know.
He built that,
Yeah.
and then they kick him out, and then they run it into the ground.
Run it into the fucking dirt, and to the point where it's like it can't come back. And then it becomes a business move, like where it's like they're at Fox Studios, so it's like, let's just not even build new wings on our X properties or our Fantastic Fours, and then you can't talk to a 25-year-old and even convince them that X-Men was anything. It's crazy.
It's that whole thing of like something hits, right? Like counterculture, and then it gets mainstreamed.
Right.
And that's what's happened. And it's like the whole appeal of X-Men was almost like it was this, I don't want to say underground, but it was definitely counter to stuff of like Captain America and your square-jawed heroes. Not anymore. Not for a long time. And probably the 90s is whenever that changes. What are the other books that we have? You need me to go look?
Yeah, I got the interest for the rest. It'll be because it's just like we got the Mobius, so that's 4, and then it's
Wizard.
It's Wizard. It's Omega Red, and then it's what was the other thing? I have it pulled. Let me see.
Not as young as you used to be, Ed.
A lot of sleepless nights.
Welcome to
man.
my brain. Welcome to my aging brain.
Oh, I know what it is. That's how the worst 2099 book. Question
Shit.
mark.
What's funny is there's some real competition.
Or no, you. I was trying to think of how to sell this, and I'm definitely like, because like there's Stanley idolaters, and I'm going to go that route. I want to edit this. I want to edit the Omega Red. I want to edit the Stan Lee, because like I have very specific ideas of how I want to sell this stuff, and it'll be something about Stan Lee. Let's see what Stan Lee can do without Jack Kirby.
Ow.
And that'll get the clicks that I'm looking for. Is there one more that you gotta?
No, that's it.
Yeah, that's okay. Wizard. November 1996, Jimmy. Could it have been the worst time in the industry of comic books in our lifetimes? Let's look at Exhibit A today on Cartoonist Kayfabe.
That's really good and accurate, but man, it is a drought. Like it's gonna be like 2 more years of that probably.
Yeah, just remembering that time, because like I was actually, I could probably even pull these books to see, but like this is when my first stuff gets published, like at the Center for the Arts in the little program and stuff, and the ritual would be to go to Phantom first and to get my pull list, and then go to art school for the day. And I remember pulling that Allred Spider-Man comic. I had Preacher, and that was like Preacher was the only book on my pull list at that point.
I was wondering what you'd be pulling at that time.
And what I was subsidizing it with was I started getting the Complete Crumb comics, and because that started in '86. There was like probably 10 or 11 volumes out by that point, and I would just slowly be getting those. I'd be getting Love and Rockets and stuff. So like I'm in the back corner of the brown Phantom of the Attic, getting shit like that. Stray Bullets. I got to issue 11, and issue 11 is being pimped in here, because that's when I sort of get sick as a boy and stuff, and kind of like ain't going to the comic shop and shit. So it's this is like such a sweet spot, but like it's so clear there's nothing in the mainstream for me, and they turned me off fucking pretty much ever since.
Yeah.
Like all that David Mack Daredevils and shit like that. I wasn't seeing none of that. Though I think maybe one of the books to pull soon would be because there's that show called Echo, and in the stuff that I bought off my teacher, that first appearance of Echo Daredevil is is represented over there.
Yeah, I haven't read any of that stuff. I'd be curious to look at that.
Yeah.
I like David Mack.
All right. Ravage 2099. Jimmy, let's take a look and see what Stan Lee can accomplish without the aid of Jack the King Kirby. You see that smile, King Kayfabers? That's a smile knowing that we're going to get 10,000 views overnight with that one.
Yeah, that you look very happy with that. That's a good one. Oh, and Jim Lee X-Men.
And Jim Lee X-Men. All right. X-Men 4. Jimmy, Chris Claremont wrote X-Men comics for about 17 years. His final issue was X-Men Volume 2, number 3. Let's take a look at X-Men Volume 2, number 4, and see how well that fares. Or actually, no, you know what? I have a better one. Because, like, I do think that, because it's John Byrne writing it, and I do think it's a cuckold. I do think that it's a cuckold. I think he's a dickhead, being a dick. Like I think he is saying yes with a big smile on his face to Jim Lee. So I'm gonna like use that like John Byrne cucks Chris Claremont. What do you think about that? You uncomfortable with that?
Yeah, I don't know that I don't know that I see that. I mean, to me, this is just paycheck, and maybe a little bit of.
It gets
fuck you,
personal,
Chris.
man. Yeah, it's well. That's the fuck you is the cuck. Is there a better way for me to sell that, Jimmy? I think there is.
The problem is
Here
it's
it is.
really
Here,
inside.
Here
that-
it is.
it's-
Here
it's
it is.
very
I
inside
got it. I
baseball.
got it. All right, you ready? X-Men 4. You guys like Omega Red, right? Well, Omega Red is a pug smack. I said pug smack. Let me try that again. Hey, you guys, you like Omega Red, right? Let's take a look at his very first appearance. He's a pud smack. How about that? And maybe that's how I'll say, like, Omega Red is a pud smack. Find out why, or just put that. Do you think that gets flagged?
Possibly.
Yeah. There is a certain, like, we don't have this to worry about because we're just not even close to there. But
Do you think Byrne was still harboring resentment to Claremont?
I
10
think
years later.
I think it's yeah, I do, because like he has nothing but time.
Yeah.
He's just sitting there all by himself doing his thing, and I do think that it's a I do think he's cucking. I'm going to say it on it when we discuss the episode for sure.
How bad is the working situation that Byrne's like, you know what, I'm out.
With those guys.
He does like 2 or 3 issues
Yeah.
that had to be.
Great paychecks.
Think of what the royalty was at
Right.
that time. Like, that's damn near peak. Like, once you get the number 1 off the cover, that's about as good of a royalty as the history of American comics. And Byrne's like, you know what, no thanks. Not worth it.
I wonder like how big the diminishing returns are for how long. Like I would love to see numbers for every issue, because like maybe issue 2 even did 2 million or something, and then like
it has to be close to a million. You know, like
Is
it's
it-
got to be a million. You know, give or take a couple 100,000.
Yeah, I was thinking. Well, there's no extra incentives, you know, with those other. But like
There
uh,
isn't, but like think of New Mutants 100 sold damn near 1 million,
right,
and there was nothing really going on there, and it was
Yeah.
even an overpriced book.
right.
So, you know, like the X-Men, like 2, 3, 4, 5, like those probably all sold 800,000.
800
You know?
is exactly the number that I have in my mind for issue number 4. And dude, those comics, like, I have no idea how comics like worked at this time or anything, but like I don't have a new, like, I got mine at Hills department store, and it has a direct market thing, so I don't understand that. Like I don't know if I got it like after like it was already out and it got kind of remaindered and sort of found its way into Hills. I have no idea how any of that worked, but like that's sort of how I got a lot of my comics, and they don't have newsstand barcodes on it.
You know, the distributors would buy like X amount, and it would exceed the store orders.
Mm-hmm.
And then I've heard of people doing those like 3 in a bag kind of things where they would go to the distribution center, and that's where they would get their comics.
Right.
So
here's the thing. I do remember like the Mile High ads and stuff were still valid for a time, for like a little bit of time. So like when I got the comic, you could still order if you had your druthers, like because you know how like the coupon it would sort of be up at a certain amount of time, but like. Is that 3 months after it comes out that it's still valid? Is it 1 month? Like, I have a lot of questions from that
because a few months.
Because I was so young.
It's like at least 3, but maybe even like 6 or.
I don't think it's that much. I don't because I definitely remember getting books with the barcode, where it was kind of tight, but like I don't remember how tight.
All right, we should go record.
Yep, guys, give us 10, 15. We're gonna tear things down, set up in the other room, and blast out the final part of our day's work. So see you in 15.